Let's check this is okay. So hopefully can you see some slides there? Excellent. Yes. So Giki stands for Get Informed, Know Your Impact, and we're a social enterprise, and we set up really to help individuals understand and reduce their environmental impacts, and to really try to bridge that surprisingly big gap between people's concern about the environment and people wanting to do the right thing, but not really knowing what right is, and how modern society or current society, the norms in current society that are not generally particularly sustainable. So we launched in 2018 a free app called Giki Badges, which rates UK supermarket products on sustainability, health and ethical issues. But we always wanted to go beyond a regular shop and cover the entirety of our lifestyles. And the feedback that we got repeatedly from people using the app was, what can we do holistically across everything everything in our lifestyles? So we built Giki Zero, which we launched last year, and I'll show you how it works shortly. But in a nutshell, it really enables you to understand and then find ways to reduce your carbon footprint. And before we get into it, I just wanted to show you a graph, which I'm sure many of you have seen in many different forms, but it shows how carbon emissions have gone up in the last 150 or so years, really since the Industrial Revolution took off, and where we are today and where we need to get to by 2030 and then 2050 net zero at the latest. And so this is really the global story, and clearly policy is crucial, business transformation equally crucial, and what we can do as individuals also is going to play a really important role, because around 70% of global greenhouse emissions come from activities that people do, that we as individuals do or buy. So that story from an individual perspective looks like this in the UK. And so our footprint based on consumption is around 9 tonnes on average in the UK. And the key parts are generally our homes, what we eat and how we get about, although that would look different for everybody. Everybody's personal pie chart would look slightly different. But what we need to do is to get to approximately 2.5 tonnes by 2030 to be on track for that net zero by 2050 at the very latest, and also to keep on that trajectory of keeping temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, and living a more Paris aligned lifestyle. So we wanted to actually work out whether that was possible and what that looks like for us as an individual, because net zero is a concept that I think governments and businesses have embraced to varying degrees, but it's not something that is necessarily particularly clear to conceive of in our own lifestyles. So we wanted to understand, what does it actually look like, and is it possible? And we did some research that came out just before Christmas with Dr. Richard Carmichael, who is at Imperial College and also wrote the Climate Change Committee Behaviour Change Report. And what was actually really good news is that it is possible to reach a Paris-aligned lifestyle already just through lifestyle changes in terms of reducing steps, which is all about reducing what we do in terms of miles driven, for example, or flights taken, and replace steps which are around switching and swapping. So swapping from a fossil fuel electricity tariff to a renewable electricity company, for example. To reach net zero, most people are going to need to do some sort of nature-based offsetting, most commonly tree planting or preservation of forests, because it's incredibly difficult to get to net zero at the moment. But hopefully these chunks, the first two, reduce and replace, will get easier, and repair, the nature-based offsetting, which will play a crucial short-term temporary role in terms of getting us to net zero, but is not a long-term solution. But we as individuals don't really think in terms of 2030, 2050. So we want to cut it up for people into much smaller chunks. And we've got a campaign running this year to encourage people to cut a ton in 21, which, based on that average footprint of around 9 tons per person, actually, if we got off the ground this year with cutting a ton from our footprint, that gets people on a pretty good path to get to net zero in the next decade or so. And we're working with the UN high-level climate champions on this, who are running this global campaign called the Race to Zero, which is actually for organisations to get to net zero by 2050 at the latest. But they're very keen that people can also get involved because we're so crucial. So I'm now going to show you how Giki Zero actually works. Are you seeing? Great. So when you first sign up, we ask a few simple lifestyle questions, which enable us to give you an estimate of your carbon footprint, which we show here against that UK average of around 9 tons, the global average, which is about 5 tons. I thought it was really important to put this global average in to remind people in wealthier nations that our personal footprints tend to be much bigger. And then this target of 2.5 tons by 2030. And you can then see how that breaks down across different parts of your lifestyle, and then get into much more detail. So there are about 10,000 different variables in the carbon footprinting part of Giki Zero, but we've really tried to make it accessible to people because most people don't enjoy putting data into spreadsheets. Some do. Luckily, a few of my colleagues do, but it's not, it's not sort of popular way to spend an evening. So we've tried to make it really simple. And you can, if you want and have the appetite to, go in and put in really granular detail, for example, here on everything that you eat on a daily or weekly basis. But most people would just go for the, back. Sorry, we've gone back too far. Most people would just go for an estimate. So say somebody might want to go from eating everything to being mainly veggie. And then you can make a few refinements as well. Yeah, okay, so let's say this person eats mainly locally grown, and then save that. And that will then show how that changes your carbon footprint. So that's the first crucial step, actually understanding how your footprint shapes up. And I think just going through this process is quite useful for people, and just thinking about, goodness me, my holiday has a footprint, and cruises in particular are very high impact. My bank account, for example, so here we cover banking and savings and pensions, and that process is already beginning to get people thinking about the fact that all of the decisions that we make do have an environmental impact. But then the important bit is, what am I actually going to do about it? And this varies person by person. And I think a one-size-fits-all doesn't really work, because our situations are all different. So what we've done here is got about 130 different steps that you can filter in terms of area of your lifestyle and how easy or difficult they are, and then what their impact is on the planet. And you can then dig through into each one and get some more detail, so tips and benefits, and where appropriate we put some useful links in. And we also show here what the co-benefits are, because to the point that you made earlier about plastic being a really good entry point, it's quite useful for people to see what the broader benefits are, because for some people cutting carbon might be sufficient, but for many, actually, if you're going to save a bit of money or reduce your plastic impact, then that could be an extra nudge. So you can then say, I'll try, and that will then feed through into your progress page, where we've got a score here along with your carbon footprint down here. And we created this score because people often struggle with the notion of a carbon footprint, but most people can get their head around a score and this feeling of progression. So the range is very large on the score, and you need to get over 1,000 to be living a truly sustainable life. So what that means is that each time you do anything positive, you get some sort of positive feedback in terms of the score increase. And another area that I don't usually focus on, but because you guys spend a lot of time thinking about this, we've also got a personal climate clock for everybody. And what this shows is if everybody had your carbon footprint, how many years we've got left till the carbon budget runs out. And certainly for the more knowledgeable, this can be quite a like, oh, crikey, that focuses the mind. And then the only other bit that's I wanted to share with you was, and then we'll have a bit of time for discussion, is you can also in your home area share with your family, or family or anybody you live with. So the way that this works is the way that this works is you can see how everybody in your household is doing, and you can track what you're doing together collectively. And I think this bit can be quite motivating, and help with a little bit of healthy competition here as well, so you can see how everyone in your house is doing compared to each other. And then we have the same model for organizations, where you can also team up with colleagues, or universities use it, or schools use it, to see how everybody is progressing together. And I think this can be quite powerful in addressing that challenge that what difference can I make as an individual? I'm kind of meaningless in this big global problem, but actually by seeing what everybody's doing together and seeing it, so for example here, what the steps are that are trending, and what some other people that are doing, that can actually be a really powerful driver. And I think one of the key challenges, which I'm sure you find in your community engagement, is just helping people feel that what they're doing is worth doing, and that they're part of something bigger. And I think that in itself, and that feeling of progress and that sort of positive feedback loop, can be really powerful for people, and encouraging them to want to go on doing more. And we generally find that people, that behavior change cycle tends to go in kind of fits and starts. So you might have an initial flurry of activity and then plateau out a bit, and then might watch a David Attenborough program, or hear from a child or some sort of close friend about, crikey, did you hear about this? And then a sort of renewed element of activity. And I think that's kind of how we change anyway, in terms of individual behavior change. And we very much designed it to try to nudge people in a direction that they feel in control of, actually, and positive about, and able to make decisions that are right for them. Because if the changes are not right for them, they're not going to be able to stick with them. So that's really important as well. But I'm going to stop talking now and see if you've got any questions or points generally. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. I've seen lots of tools and footprinting calculators, and we're involved with the early stages of the footprinting movement and everything. And I must say that it is absolutely fantastic what you're doing. I love all the different kind of parts of it and how you're pulling it together. And it sounds like it's driven by some good behavioural science as well. And I had two questions. Well, one was around that behavioural science, and have you really tweaked it to help push people along, kind of thing? And then the second one is the team side of it. I've signed up and create a family team, but as a community, we're trying to drive community action, and we're working with town council, of which there's a couple on the call tonight. Would we be able to do like a community module? Is there a community module planned, and how are you enabling that to happen and still get enough income to keep developing it?
Yeah, so on the behaviour change part, we have a lot of, so I set Giki up with my husband James, and we did all sorts of different things before, but my focus was very much around sustainability and communicating it to people, and actually more around corporate behaviour change. But principles are quite similar. And James had done a lot of work around behavioural finance. He worked in finance before, and so a lot of that feeds into the design of Giki Zero. And we've also learned a huge amount from how people interact with Giki badges as well, the supermarket scanning app, which over 80% of people report changing buying decisions as a result of using it. And that's enabled us to build a behaviour change framework, which is based on giving people the right information in the right tone and at the right time, because it's also a bit like peeling back an onion. If you give people too much at the wrong time, they're just like totally overwhelmed. And you want to give people the ability to kind of dig down when they're ready, but to do that in their own time and not overwhelm them. So yeah, that's a really important part of it. And in terms of the community piece, so yeah, we do work with a lot of different communities actually, some are using the Teams version, many are using the free version, and we run a program called Eco Champions, which is to support. I'm going to step back a bit. So the tool is crucial in helping people understand, but an equally important part is the human element, which luckily tech can't totally, make us obsolete. And the ongoing engagement and nudging and reminding people and motivating them, which can come in lots and lots of different forms. This group that we run, where we meet monthly and lots of people share lots of different ideas. So we've got lots of counsellors on that group, but also local community groups, parishes, local councils, boroughs, and also, all sorts of other community groups in the broadest sense. So we've got a GP and we've got someone in TV production, where although the situations are different, the principles are actually pretty similar in terms of how do you motivate individuals to take action. So if you wanted to use, either the free version or the Teams version, you're very welcome to be part of that group. Dave.
Hi Joe, thanks. I mean, that was brilliant. There's such a lot of depth in that. I hadn't realised what's behind the front end of it. It's amazing. My question is more, the last 12 months, we've changed, our footprints, I guess, will have changed significantly. It's almost a bit of a shame we're starting now in a way, because, I feel that obviously my transport footprint is hugely reduced compared to 12 months ago. And I've had more time thinking about the sort of sustainability of what I'm buying and buying local and all that sort of thing. But on the flip side, my heating and lighting has probably gone in completely the wrong direction by quite significantly. So if we start to baseline now, how are we going to sort of retain the gains that we've made over the last 12 months without going backwards and sort of demotivating people? Have you got any thoughts as how we should sort of realistically baseline ourselves and our friends to demonstrate making progress from now on?
Yeah, so the challenge with the score is very much, and indeed but the score principally is designed to show where you are at a particular point in time. So you'd score much higher now than you would have done a year ago because your footprint would be much smaller. So that's already built into the system. The challenge with a baseline, in terms of where my starting point, and we've had lots of conversations about how to make this work, is that where is the starting point? Is it when you first sign up? Probably not, because you haven't gone in and put in all the detail, and also because people tend to they might sign up, answer the initial questions, but then they might go in and fill in a couple of footprints, but most people would not fill in the entirety of their footprint on the first sitting, and they might go back to it through some prompt in the future. So it's basically impossible to have where do you start? So what we've done with the score and within the Teams function, and indeed within the household function, is shown the carbon saved as a result of the steps that you've taken. And the score reflects where you are at any particular point in time. So that that we hope helps address both of those challenges, in that, you know, how good, in inverted commas, am I, as reflected by the score, and the footprint also, but the score reflects this, you know, your progress in terms of steps that you've taken and committed to. And then the actual counting of carbon, water, plastic and land use savings, and that's done on an average, you know, UK average system.
Yeah, thanks.
And I would add, Joe, as well, it's based on where you need to get to too, so that remains constant.
Yeah, exactly.
And so everybody's got that to move towards. Yeah,
I think that's right. And I think, yeah, that's a very good point, that actually it almost doesn't matter where we're coming from. It's where we've got to get to that's the important bit.
I can see that overall. I think what I'm taking away from that is we mustn't concentrate too much on the individual parts of that. We've just got to keep a view of the overall footprint, I think, and make sure that's continually improving.
Yeah.
And Joe, do you just some sort of like scale, like how many people in the UK are currently using the application? And
I think it's about 10,000 now who are using Giki Zero, and then about 60,000 on Giki badges, and that's just because it's been around longer.
Okay, and do you have any concept of the amount of CO2 or amount of savings that those people have made during the length of time that they've all been signed onto the platform? Do you have this sort of like this big running total of the whole Giki community?
We do, actually. I'm afraid I haven't got that to hand, but we do track. So we track the amount of carbon that people have committed to save, which is generally higher than the amount they've actually saved, because that's the steps that you've committed to rather than the steps that you've completed. And then we also track the total amount of carbon saved, which may be some of it as a result of activities that somebody was already doing. So, you know, if you sign on and you say, okay, well, I'm already vegetarian, we do track that, but we don't actually feel we can take any credit for that, because that was nothing to do with us. They were doing that already.
Understand. Thank you.
Kate. Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Thank you. And first of all, I just want to say how useful it is to have a tool like this, because I do think part of the problem is people genuinely want to do something, but they just don't know what. And we don't have any, you know, centralized source of information at the moment to give us guidance. So, you know, it's just fantastic to have that as a tool. I'm really interested in engagement, so thinking of how we can encourage our members to take it up. So I've got a couple of questions, and I guess the first one would be, what would you say if any of our members had privacy concerns about their data? Because obviously you are inputting a lot of stuff about your personal life. And the other one is, I guess, how to get the right balance. So obviously as a group, we absolutely want to encourage everyone and support everyone to do what they can as an individual, but we also want to encourage people to work together to do more for our community. And I just wonder, you know, how to get the balance right, so you're not just focusing on what you're doing. And also, we have had discussions in the past about, you know, the aspect of guilt. So environmental guilt, it can be quite crushing, and it can make you feel bad, and then you get caught in a bit of a vicious cycle and you don't do anything. So just in terms of engagement, really, I'd be really interested to hear what you think.
Sure. So on the data and the collection of data, so our approach is one of data minimization. So we collect as little as possible to deliver the information that we think that people need, and that is really important. And we have lots of conversations with organizations who are using the pro version around exactly this point, that exactly that question that you raised. You know, how do I feel personally about the fact that I'm putting this information in, and, you know, what's it being used for? So we don't use it in any way for any form of marketing or any, you know, we don't sell it or give it to anybody. We would only use it in, well, it's no longer personal data once it's aggregated and anonymous, to look at trends and exactly the point that we were just talking about in terms of amount of carbon saved. And we're absolutely, you know, we're really committed to that point that, you know, we're not in this to collect a load of data to, you know, harness it in some way other than trying to encourage people to reduce their carbon emissions, and that really sits at the heart of what we're doing. In terms of the engagement, it very much depends on what the sort of levels of connection are within your community as to what the best ways are to engage them. But when we've got lots of sort of activation and suggestion ideas, and that this Eco Champions group is really useful for that, because, you know, people share what they're doing, and it's really collaborative actually, and there's lots of sharing of, you know, toolkits and all sorts of things, because everybody's trying to achieve the same aim in their local community. But so things like virtual drop-in workshops, they can be quite effective if you get the timing right and you sort of, you know, get the right incentive to get people to drop in. Having that notion of working collectively towards something in the pro version. So, for example, a group in Cornwall called Helston Footprints, who they've been quite pioneering in work that they've done over the years around sustainability in their town, but they're building teams around different parts of their community. So I think they've got a WI team and a rugby club team, and so that's quite an interesting way of doing it. They're the only ones at the moment who are doing it like that. Others are doing it much more, you know, not necessarily building teams, but just having people involved individually. So within the pro version, you can have specific teams, or you can just have everybody in the same group, and you can all just work collectively towards a goal. I think also prompting people with particular steps that might resonate to them. You know, a super simple one, an obvious one, is change to renewable energy, and, you know, giving them a good reason why. And it does depend a lot on the community and, you know, the level of engagement, the level of knowledge as well, and the financial situation as well, because, you know, the money saving element can be a good driver. And I think, yeah, I mean, one community group actually, which I was very surprised about, they're based in Chester. They've recently started using the pro version, funded by some COVID funding that they got through. So I think they might be hiring somebody, or they're doing a sort of broader project, of which Giki Zero is a part of it, to try to address isolation and to bring people together, to, you know, be in a community, albeit a virtual one, focusing on sustainability. So there are lots of different ways that it can be approached. And yeah, I mean, you're very welcome to join one of these calls and hear what other people are doing, because it's yeah, very varied actually in terms of what works.
Thanks, Joe. That's really helpful.
Joe, perhaps just one last question before you finish. Oh, sorry, so Dave had his hand up. Oh, and Steve, sorry, Stephen, I've already asked a question. Steve.
Yeah, please. Thank you. I'm interested, so the group's getting together, sort of something cool. You must be the peer pressure then to get other people in and out of these organisations involved as well. Presumably also, as a town councillor, thinking of things like local authorities, pressure on them if they're refurbishing a building to do it as so it is carbon neutral as possible, encourage them to use more carbon friendly vehicles. Interesting, Joe Biden said all US official vehicles, all 900,000, will be electric. Whether hopefully that would have some effect on the authorities all over the world. But it's basically how to spread the peer pressure, the information, also people to know this is the right thing to do and the clever thing to do.
Yeah, and it's really hard as well for councils, as I'm sure that you guys must find that. I know in my local council, the council only have control over about 18% of their emissions. So if you've declared a climate emergency or committed to net zero, you've got to engage your community and get them to, you know, even if it's use government incentives to insulate their home or whatever it might be, that the general public need to be part of delivering that net zero ambition. And I think that's a really tough one for councils, because it's a huge part of it is actually out of their control. So they need to find other mechanisms to achieve it, and a lot of the behaviour change piece is going to be crucial, I think. Dave?
Yeah, I just I was coming back to engagement. Really, I'm just thinking if we have a tree planting day, for example, and we wanted to advertise that to community, could we? Is there an easy metric we can generate from Giki that says, we're going to plant 100 trees, that's worth X tons of carbon or something?
Yeah, so you can, say everyone would have to put it into their own personal footprint, but say you plant 100 trees and 50 people are involved, so they can all take responsibility for 2 trees. If they each put in that they've planted 2 trees, then that would feed through. And that's the only so tree planting and forest preservation are built into the model, because at the moment they're really the only offsets. I mean, obviously there's oceans and grassland and peatland that play a really crucial role, but as an individual, there aren't many projects out there that you can actually get involved in around them.
But is there a sort of rule of thumb reckoner that we can access within Giki that says 100 trees is worth X tons?
Yes, so we can. So the methodology is on the website, so you can see how we've calculated the tree component, or you could literally just put in, okay, I'm going to plant 5 trees, and you'll see what that will do to your footprint.
Just building on that, a secondary question. I appreciate that your time's short, Joe, so thank you very much. But we talked about, and Chris, who's joined the call later on, is grass-fed pasture.
Yes.
With beef, and it's a hot debate. Does it help sequester carbon or not? And as we're searching for all this evidence to work out, but it's massively different from kind of lot farmed beef, and so I'm assuming that you've got this like learning cycle, and that when new evidence comes up, and I noticed you have an advisory board, so you get it peer reviewed, do you, and stuff. Once you're comfortable with it, that'll then get updated with it, because soil sequestration is, I think, one of the quickest ways that we can actually draw down carbon, and so I was just wondering how that's going to be incorporated as evidence builds.
Yeah, so the grass-fed beef and the pasture-fed beef is a really interesting one, and it comes up a lot. And at the moment, we just haven't found robust enough data to be able to incorporate it to show that difference. But I think, obviously the industry is doing a huge amount, or some aspects of the livestock industry are doing a huge amount of work in that area, and I think it would be really nice to be able to show that to people so that they can make that choice. And the other thing, of course, is availability as well. Grass-fed beef is generally not on your supermarket shelves, but hopefully over time it might be.
And just one follow-up with that, is it going international? So obviously carbon factors will be different. Are you going international?
Yeah, so we've got the US version that we're launching in a month or 2, and then key European economies before the summer, and then we'll make a decision on, is it Australia or and our main governing the main governing of our decision making is based on potential carbon savings, and generally where the biggest footprints are, which are generally in the wealthier nations, always in the wealthier nations.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Perhaps just one last question before you go. So just to recap then, so the general application, it's free for anybody to sign up to, and that also gets you access into your personal or house team sort of option. Exactly. And then you mentioned a couple of times the pro version. That's a chargeable solution then, I presume. And
yes, it is. So we've got a commercial rate, which is around, well, it ranges between about 30p and 80p per person per month. And then we do a 70% discount for not-profits, which obviously you are. And that works out, I think, around I think it's about 17p per person per month. So it's, so and this is off the top of my head, but for 100 or a community of 100 or so people, I think it's something like £300 a year or something like that.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I don't know if anybody else has got any more questions, but perhaps, thank you very much for coming along and discussing Giki and your initiative this evening. I found it personally very interesting again.
That's a pleasure. Well, it's really nice to talk to you, and it's also nice to talk to people who are so knowledgeable about it as well. Sounds like you've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. So yeah, good luck with it. And yeah, do just ping me if you want to. Well, definitely you're very welcome, any of you, to join the next Eco Champions call, which is, we usually do it in the second week of each month. But equally, yeah, if you've got any more questions, just shout.
And where are those meetings announced? Are they on your website?
They're not actually. No, we just invite people that we know. It's sort of invite only. But okay. You'd be very welcome.
Okay, great, lovely.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, really good to meet you all.
Great.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much.
All the best with it. Go for it.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Great. So I think we're going to just hang on a little bit now to think a little bit more widely about what Joe's shown us. Dave had a presentation that he was going. Before we realised that Joe was so time pressured on the fact that she had to leave, Dave was going to do a presentation beforehand. Dave, do you still want to do your few slides now, or shall we just have a general discussion about Giki and how we think it might work? Or
yeah. And I also thought we could show Giki on screen, because Joe gave a very whistle-stop tour, and I know that we could show people around if they wanted to have a look in more detail. So why don't we just kind of go with that? And I can kind of, I won't take long, and I can give 5 minutes later on if you want, just to kind of put it into some kind of context. But the idea was that I was setting the scene, so that's kind of gone now, but I can still probably just help put some context on it at the end if you want to listen.
I think that'd be really helpful, Dave. Yeah, that would be great.
So do we want to do that after we have a chat about how to use Giki, or for before?
Do it before, I think.
Yeah.
Do it before. Okay. All right. So let me just pull that up. 2 seconds while I'm just sharing it.
Shall we carry on recording this part, or should we stop the recording? What do you think, Kate?
I think carry on recording, because it'd be nice to be able to circulate this, wouldn't it?
Okay.
If Dave's all right with it.
I'm fine with it. So okay. Can you see that?
We can.
You can. Okay.
Yes.
So the thing is kind of putting the personal impact into context, and there's plenty of things that we can do, but actually we can be clever about some of the choices we make, and certain things perhaps we should do more than doing other things. And so I just wanted to kind of put a little bit of context around that. And Joe covered a lot of this stuff, and I must say I have genuinely seen like tens and tens of footprint calculators over the years, both also for a corporate level and to try to kind of change people's behaviors, lots of tools. And I must say that the way that Giki works is really quite impressive. You can look at it from lots of different angles, and I think she showed that earlier on. I think that's worth kind of considering again. But should we feel really guilty? And generally the answer is no. We should feel that we have a part to play and that we've got a role to play in this, but taking kind of full responsibility for where we've managed to get to in essentially a very, very short space of time. We shouldn't necessarily, because there's a lot of stuff behind why we've got ourselves into this situation, and business and policy makers are really in the prime positions to influence the impacts and the outcomes. So if we all made great decisions with what we bought and did in our lives, unless that's supported by more structural changes in the way that we run our economy and the choices that are made at international and national policy levels, we will still get nowhere near net zero. So we've got to be kind of aware of that. And the kind of dynamic of that has changed from one of like just outright denial that climate change exists, and that's kind of pretty much gone now. It's not completely gone. I was on a call the other day with an Australian industry leader who's on a board of a company that looks on organisation that looks at steel. He was pretty much a climate change denier, and I'm like, you know, you're living in a country that was half burnt to the ground last year, and you're still prepared to stand up and say that. So anyway, things are changing though. There's less denial, and there's more kind of deflection, delay, division, doom mongering and despair. We can't do anything anyway, let's not worry. Sowing the seeds of division within communities of people that are trying to make a difference. So saying, you know, it's just an elitist thing for white folks, that kind of approach, creating division and trying to get people arguing, well, actually, you're better off doing this rather than that. Why aren't you a vegan? That kind of approach is not very helpful. So there's that division. Then there's deflection. And a classic example is, well, guns don't kill people. People do. But I've always observed, having lived both in the States and in the UK, I'm much less likely to die from gun crime in the UK than I was when I lived in the States. There's lots more guns there, you know, and there's all kinds of, you know, debates around that we can have. But it's this idea to deflect away. Well, it's how you're using stuff that's leading to the problems, and it's all about an individual when it's not really the case. And it's deflecting attention away from the fact we need system change. And Kate, you mentioned this to me, and when I was doing my environmental masters in the 90s, BP did the project, and I remember this time in the 90s when BP were developing this, and at the time they weren't alone. There was other people that were developing footprint calculators, but this kind of thought process that BP went through, I know from kind of talking to some of the folks, they weren't just trying to push out the responsibility onto individuals, but it's very convenient. And that has managed to delay progress. And really, we needed to be acting with kind of scale 30 years ago, and we didn't. And that's why we're in this mess that we are now, where we've really got to act make change very quickly. And there's lots of other examples. So we've suddenly turned from being citizens and people to consumers over the last 20 years, when actually I feel my life is much more complete than just being a consumer. But most people would talk about people as consumers. Focus on recycling. There's a massive story behind that. Do feel free to look into it. But essentially, recycling can, in some cases, have a very marginal benefit, and in the worst cases, no benefit whatsoever. And yet it's been really promoted by industry over the years as a solution, when they haven't really questioned whether they should be producing what they're producing or whether we need to consume stuff. And I spend my life working with business, and I'm not anti-business. But anyway, so that's the kind of dynamic to kind of think about. And then secondly, the big thing is that some impacts can make much more difference than others, and that's where Giki really comes into its own, because it can really, you can actually look at it. If you notice, when on one of the screens she had like little impact, medium impact, big impact, you know, enormous impact, so you can actually select the things that you might want to do by the level of impact that you want to have. And often, because of all the things I've just talked about, when you talk to people about environment, the first thing that they'll say is, well, you know, I do a bit of recycling, and I have changed my light bulbs, and I'm trying to avoid plastic, all of which will make very little difference overall to our overall carbon budget, and really reducing it down to where we need to be. And that's not to say they're not good things to do, because they're fantastic things to do. Change a light bulb to LED, it will pay for itself in 10 months. So it's one of those decisions that you need to do anyway. Don't wait for your lights to pop and then do it. Just get on and do it, because it will save you money and it will save a lot of emissions. But people get confused about what to do. So Giki can really help this. But some things like, I always remember going up to Bassett recycling centre up on by Sainsbury's car park, and there was somebody that had left their car running, and they were like, one by one, taking a bottle out of the boot and going and putting it into the thing, and their car was running. It's like, well, don't bother, because you would have negated that benefit straight away. And so it's just getting a kind of feel for what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, and understanding that some impacts are better than others. And then looking at the choices that we've got. So I really do support the approach where we do understand our own personal impacts. And what I love about Giki is it's not just about what you buy, and it's about broader decisions. And a lot of their impact areas and the way that Joe and team have structured it means that they're encouraging wider solutions as well. So there was some research from Nordea, which is a big Norwegian pension and investment organization, and they found that if you changed your pension fund from being just a normal one that tracked market indices, for example, and things like that, to one that focused on ethical and environmental investment, it can be 28 times more effective than pretty much anything else that you do, because you keep putting your money into things that are positive rather than contributing without even knowing to. So that's where to kind of to climate change, and that's where like the fossil fuel divestment movement has come from, and it's really important. So I would urge anybody with a pension to really push down there. So that's quite big, and the other big things are kind of like how you travel around, and we've talked about some of those other ones, but some of the things that we didn't really talk about so much are lobbying and activism, so calling out inconsistent policy. So at the moment the government's doing a great job with a 10-point plan that's got lots of great ideas in it, but at the same time as it's doing that, it's still saying, well, we're going to invest 27 billion in the road network over 5 years, and within, you know, it's got 2 billion for cycling over the same time period, and it just doesn't, it's not consistent. So we've got to call out inconsistencies, and if we do some of the things that are the policy inconsistencies, we won't meet our targets. So we've got to focus on the science and what we really need to do, when we need to stop doing certain things and change what we do. So that's a lobbying and activism to encourage policy decision making to be aligned to it, and we need to look at the whole system at speed and scale, and then take individual responsibility as well. And just being part of that change, it can be kind of quite supportive as a kind of community of interest and a group of people doing it. You don't feel alone. You don't feel that you're just kind of trying hard to do it without getting anywhere and getting any support. We can really make a difference, and we can kind of change how people perceive this and think about it. So change perceptions of what's possible, offer a vision. What would Wootton Bassett look like if it really was carbon zero? That's the kind of things that we need to be thinking about, be part of this movement for change, and then do all these individual things as well to be healthier, happier, and kind of provide some inspiration. So that was the context that I was hoping to provide before Joe's examples of then how we do it, but happy to kind of answer any questions or to show the Geeky app and discuss Geeky. And Jason, I think you're in charge tonight, aren't you?
Well, we're collective, so I'm not too sure anybody's really in charge.